This is my turbocharged 1992 BMW E34 525i, finished in Calypso Red. And in this video, we're going to do a full build rundown of this entire car, because the last time I did this, not only have I changed some things, but that was probably in my first couple months of YouTube, and I don't even think I had 500 subscribers. And the video did a lot of views, but it was one of my early videos. The production was low. I think it was kind of all over the place, really long. This is going to be a much more concise, down to the point, everything I have done to this car, drivetrain wise, to make 560 wheel horsepower and 586 wheel torque. I got a build list over there, so I keep myself on track. I'm going to run you guys through everything from the engine specs to the drivetrain specs to all that stuff. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So to start with the engine. The engine is an M50 B25 Vanos motor, which is stock to these cars, but not this car. I swapped it in. This was actually a non-Vanos car because it was a 92. So what is done to this engine is literally just a Cometic MLS head gasket, a .140 spacer on it, I believe, which I think brings the compression to a 9:1. It has been so many years, I honestly can't even remember. Other than that, ARP head studs, and that is it. It is a bone stock bottom end, a stock head, and it's holding up all this power. We have a stock intake manifold, stock fuel rail, stock accessories, which aren't really, none of that's important, but so that's pretty cool. The cooling system of this car, bone stock as well. We have stock radiator, stock clutch fan, stock water pump, low temp thermostat actually, but that is, you know, kind of neither here nor there. That's not a super major thing. That is the engine and the cooling system. The drivetrain of this car is a ZF 5-speed transmission, stock transmission, stock drive shaft, stock CSB, stock Guibo, stock 3.46 LSD, stock axles. Everything is holding up to this power perfectly fine. It's snowing if you can't see, but the drivetrain of this car is stock. The clutch on this is a ClutchNet dual diaphragm ceramic 6-puck clutch kit. I'm not sure if ClutchNet's still around. This was a clutch that wasn't even listed on their website. You had to custom order this. Basically, it holds twin disc power at half the price. So it is the heaviest, stiffest clutch, and I hate it, but it holds up to power really well. So that is the clutch kit on this car and the drivetrain. Obviously, the most important thing here that everyone's worried about, the turbo on this is a Precision 6262 ball bearing turbo on an OBX E36 manifold, which has been modified. OBX manifolds usually have the wastegate coming out the front. With the E34, that didn't really work, so it's rerouted here with a 3-inch downpipe and a full 3-inch exhaust with an eBay resonator. The intercooler piping is just a random Amazon kit with Amazon couplers, and it's 2.5 on the hot side, goes through a CX Racing E36 intercooler in the front, comes out and ends up going into 3-inch and then into the manifold. Tile wastegate, tile blow-off valve. It's a 44 millimeter wastegate blow-off valve. I'm not sure how the sizing works on those. I don't remember. This turbo has a .63 AR exhaust side, which is kind of small, and I think it kind of chokes off power up top, but it is good enough for now. This thing runs 28 PSI. It's on E85 with the low compression, and it makes it really laggy. Also, the Vanos isn't tuned in on this car right now. None of my tuners are like BMW guys and understood how to turn that on. No big deal. It still puts down fine power. It's just a little bit laggier. So the engine management of this car is an ECU Master Classic ECU with the plug-and-play that uses the stock engine harness. We have a custom harness, which is this loom right here, and this is for our IAT, our boost solenoid, our flex fuel, and our lambda sensors. Those are all wired in on their own. Since it's a standalone ECU, there's no MAF, there's no AFM, there's none of that. It uses an IAT on that side, and then obviously MAP sensor, which is built into the ECU, which I have all feeded into my manifold with a vacuum block. So the fueling of this car, we have a Walbro 535 Hellcat fuel pump, single pump, with stock lines and a stock filter running E85, no problem. The fuel pump is hardwired with the DoucheWorks hardwiring kit, which basically runs a relay and runs your fuel pump straight to the battery rather than how it's usually run, which is through like a harness and feed it into some sort of electronics in the car. Basically what that does is that ensures that you don't lose power to your pump, because if you're making 560 wheel and you're at 7,000 RPMs, you do not want your fuel pump to stutter, because that is how you blow up engines. So I think that is a crucial thing you should do to one of these cars if you're boosting it. And it's old 30-year-old cars, 30-year-old electronics, not very reliable for holding a lot of power and a lot of fuel pressure. We have a MagnaFuel fuel pressure regulator right there with the fuel pressure sensor sticking out of it. We have a GM flex fuel sensor, which you can kind of see down there behind the IAT. 1200cc injectors that are actually off of 7M, so there's some adapters that make them fit. And then for the ignition system on this car, we are using bone stock coil packs, original Bremis, and NGK 4091 spark plugs at a .021 gap. That's what Arcade Tunes recommends for boosted M50s and stuff. Even though it's not an arcade tune or anything like that, that's a pretty good thing to live by. And I know a lot of people that run that setup with no issues. People that do all the different ignition on M50s, it's just not necessary. Stock coil packs are good for, as we know here, about 650 crank. So anything more than that, I can't attest to, but pretty sure they're good for about 800. So, and then for drivetrain mounting, you know, motor mounts, trans mounts, and all that stuff, we are using Condor solid mounts for the engine and trans, which are usually pretty brutal, but the E34 handles them very well. I'm actually pretty pleased with them. And then for the diff bushings, so there's 3 of them. I did the bushings on this car back in the day before PowerFlex made all 3 in poly. There was a Lithuanian company, I believe, that made the poly front diff bushing, which is what I have, and then I have stock rears. I have PowerFlex subframe bushings, the front, you know, the beer cans. The rear subframe is OEM. And then the brake setup on this car and what's stopping all this power is stock 525 rear brakes and then 540 front upgraded brakes. So that is the E34 540 front brakes. People do those often on these cars, and can genuinely say, though I don't motorsport or track this car, I have not once been in a situation where I felt like the 540 front brakes didn't stop me when I wanted to be stopped. And as a reminder, this is over 500 horsepower and, you know, highway pulls, street pulls. Obviously, I have a brain and I'm not doing pulls in high traffic areas or in situations where I know I might have to slam the brakes. But things happen. You might have to slam your brakes, and I have certainly had to slam on the brakes, and I can say these 540 brakes have felt pretty good. Oh, and I forgot to mention, for the ICV and under manifold setup, we just have stock ICV with the silicone maximum PSI, I believe is the brand, ICV hoses. So we have silicone, that like short hose that goes into the manifold, and that is epoxied in. And then we also have the longer one that goes into the intake boot, also silicone, and that is hose clamped. A lot of the intake stuff stock doesn't have hose clamps. I have hose clamps on everything. And on top of that, I forgot to mention the catch can setup. It's literally just a generic catch can that's routed from the breather on the valve cover and just mounted, and then it just drains to atmosphere. And the thing that is on top of my oil filler cap is actually an OEM Volkswagen part. I can't remember the part number. If I find it, I'll drop it in the video. It is a crankcase breather from like Volkswagen. And what that does is allows more crankcase breathing from my engine, aside from just the crank or the catch can. And the last thing I forgot to mention is the turbo plumbing. So it is a -4 AN feed that comes from the oil filter housing. There's a spot on there that you can route it from. And then it is a -10 drain that is tapped into the top of the oil pan. Right above the drain pan, there's a nice little flat spot there, which is where it drains into, and I have not had any issues with that. So there we have it. That is the full overview of all the important aspects of my turboed 525i. Like I said at the beginning, I wasn't going to go over the tires and interior mods and stuff like that. It's not really important. But now, if you guys were wondering, the main thing about this, the costs. What has this car cost me to build? And this price is not including any of the coilovers, any of the suspension, nearly nothing other than just turbo related stuff. I'm in about $15,000, and take that with a grain of salt, because I have gone through multiple iterations with this car. A lot of that cost came from basically trial and error of trying OBD1 setups, like OBD1 tunes before I went standalone, different turbos. I got the fabrication work redone twice, or I guess once. So I've had 2 different fab works on it. So many things. It took me probably 4 dyno attempts, maybe actually 5. I've gone through 5 dyno attempts with this car. 3 with the first turbo, 2 with the second. I mean, it's been rough. The things, most of this was done in my garage. Fabrication and dyno work are what was not the tuning, and those kill you. So if you can piece together everything, if you could wire, if you could build the engine, if you could fabricate, tune, this could be very cheap for you. It's as cheap as parts, and you know, parts all change. Like I got the turbo used, way cheaper than a brand new Precision. So much stuff. Like if you were to buy a ZF now, it's very expensive. I got the ZF with the motor very fairly priced, yet it still just ended up being a lot of money. And that's just how it goes. If you can't work on a car yourself, I think it is completely unfeasible to do something like this, if I'm going to be completely brutally honest, because I know a lot of people talk about wanting to turbo a car, and it's a lot of people that have never even touched a car, and it is not for the faint of heart. If you pay a shop to do all this, you're going to be in over $20,000, over $30,000. It will be insane. This is a lot of hookups from friends that know how to do things, from me understanding how to work on this car, and used parts, and me being a parts guy, so having a lot of these parts. I mean, you are talking so much money for LSDs these days, ZF transmissions these days, engines these days, fab work these days. Everything is very expensive. So about 15 grand with multiple iterations. So that also means if you are on the right track, you get the good stuff first. Don't do the cheap stuff. Go standalone right away. OBD1 tunes don't work. Go with the good parts. This can be about 10 grand, if not lower, depending on your skill level. But I would say a good average to say is about 15 grand. That is my price. It could be cheaper for you. It could be more expensive. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But otherwise, that is the Turbo 525i. Hope you guys enjoyed this little overview, updated overview. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to see videos on this car, driving and stuff, there's a ton on my channel, so go check them out. Peace.